Dr. Sreeram Chaulia is joining us now, Professor and Dean of Jindal School of International Affairs. Hi there, thanks for your time. As our correspondent was saying there, nothing proved at this point, but if it turns out that Turkey is planning to invade Syria, what would its objectives be?
I think Turkey is finding itself frustrated by its failure to carve out its large sphere of influence in northern Syria. And the peace talks that have been happening in Geneva over Syria were also scuttled by the intransigence of some of the Turkish and Saudi Arabia-backed opposition groups which are linked to jihadist fighters on the ground. So I think now the expectation of the jihadists in Syria is that their main patrons, Turkey and Saudi Arabia, will now deliver more weapons to stave off their defeat on the battlefield by the Syrian army, by the Iranians and the Russians. So in a way, I think Turkey is using these threats or saber rattling of a potential invasion or sending signals like these to try and save its proxies that are now biting the dust in the battlefield in Syria.
Just looking at the motivation here, possible motivation, I know it's if and but why, but if this is really happening, could this be a response to a recent Kurdish expansion in Syria?
Oh, sure. That's also there. In fact, the Turkish and the NATO propaganda has changed, because earlier the Kurds used to be favored by the West, but increasingly what is happening now is that the Western agenda, which Turkey is now fronting in the region and bringing in NATO, is to try and counter the Kurdish expansion. And the Kurdish rebels have gained a lot of territory at the expense of ISIS. So ideally they should be welcome, but instead they're being trying to be pushed out. Even during the Syrian peace talks, there was an attempt to sideline the Kurds. And I think Turkey is aiming to also beat back the Kurdish resurgence in the region, because for Turkey, ISIS is not a problem. Rather, ISIS and allied jihadists or similar jihadist groups are welcome for Turkey because they help to keep the Kurdish problem under control for them.
Yeah, as our correspondent's been saying this afternoon, that area, as we've seen, such a volatile area, such a tinderbox, so many parties, so many elements involved in it. I mean, we've got to bear in mind Turkey's involved, of course, in the ongoing Syria peace process talks, scheduled to resume at the end of the month, delayed for now. What are the broader consequences going to be? What would the consequences be if indeed Turkey does go in there? It's really going to kick off, isn't it?
It will be a disaster, because already Turkey has, in a sense, invaded Syria through its proxies. And it is now increasingly veering towards Saudi Arabia's agenda and Qatar's agenda in the region, and is trying to counter the Iranian influence in Syria. So I think Turkey's objectives is become far more divisive. It's also got a very Sunni and sectarian angle to its policies now under President Erdoğan, and all of those are being reflected. They want to topple President Assad in Syria by hook or crook, and they are going to try and use foul as well as fair means to try and do this. And we are going to increasingly see greater destabilization. It's a bad news for the peace process, and for the patrons like the United States, who are blaming Russia for the failure of peace talks, they better get the act together and see the reality on the ground, which is that their own allies, NATO members like Turkey, are at the root of the problem in Syria.
Well, indeed, the Russian defence ministry has been accusing NATO of ignoring its complaints about Turkish violations. Are we going to hear NATO speaking up here, saying, no, this shouldn't happen to Turkey, as you say, one of its members? What's the broader international community going to say about this if it happens?
It will not happen, first of all, because Turkey is now increasingly being seen as a necessary tool for NATO to continue to expand into the Middle East, just as they use Baltic states in Eastern Europe to expand. And Turkey is also getting back into the good books of the European Union by promising them to control the refugee flows. And so therefore, what we are seeing is the West, which talks about wanting to bring about a lasting solution in Syria, is to Turkey to try and drive a wedge in the region and to keep the region boiling.
Dr. Sreeram Chaulia, thank you for being on the programme. Thank you for your time today. Nice to see you, sir.